Blog Talk Radio.
Hey folks, this is your man in Amsterdam, Bram Sarkowski. Get ready for the Social Spitball Show on blogtalkradio.com with your co-host Barbara D, right after a word from our kind sponsors. Do you appreciate listening to the Social Spitball Show? Well, your man in Amsterdam, your host, Bram Sarkowski, and co-host Barbara D, appreciate the indispensable support of Barry Sensa of Facebook, Robin Conrad of the Democratic 2014 and 2016 Change Campaign of Facebook, and Crystal Stevens, the Liberal Kitty. You can find all three, and us, and get to know your candidates and guests. Learn about current issues, and listen to exciting podcasts, all in one place. KnowYourCandidates.weebly.com. That's KnowYourCandidates.weebly.com. WEEBLY.com. Visit the link. Enjoy the content. Oh, and while you're there, show some love. Donate under contact. Thanks for listening.
Hello, folks. Bram Sarkowski of the Social Spitball Show. You know, North Carolina Supreme Court Justice Robin Hudson won the May 6th primary. We've done our part to re-elect her to the North Carolina Supreme Court, right? Wrong. Part 1 of a two-part plan to knock out fair justices by the Koch brothers and other conservative groups has failed. However, a conservative will join Justice Hudson on the November 4th ballot. We need to stand up and fight for our fair justices who stand up for average North Carolinians on a daily basis. North Carolina Supreme Court Justices Robin Hudson and Sherry Beasley, along with Judge Sam Jimmy Irvin IV, need your votes for them for North Carolina Supreme Court on November 4th. Judges Mark Davis and Lucy Inman also need your votes for North Carolina Court of Appeals on November 4th. Visit fairjudgesnc.com to learn more about each of these judges. Spread the word. Register new voters. Get out and vote, and get out the vote. Our daily lives depend on it. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to the Social Spitball Show with your host, Bram Sarkowski. This is your forum to discuss politics, religion, democracy, and sometimes even music, sports, and culture. Please join Bram and your co-host, Barbara D. Let's get the conversation going.
And as always, I'm here with Barbara D. Let's get the conversation going. But first, I want to check in with Barbara about, 2 days till Election Day. What can you say about what's been going on?
Well, Wilson County has been working very, very hard getting out the vote. And then some of us had the privilege of going up and seeing Bill Clinton the other day. President Bill Clinton came to Raleigh to support Kay Hagan's campaign. And a few even got their pictures taken with him, so I thought that was great. So that kind of spurred us on. I was really, really impressed with the caliber of the speeches, not just Bill Clinton, but Governor Jim Hunt gave a great speech. Representative David Price and G.K. Butterfield, both of them gave great speeches, and of course Kay Hagan gave a great speech. So if you weren't enthused and fired up and ready to go when you left there, something was wrong with you.
I can imagine.
We've had, it was good. It was very inspiring. I was impressed. And then on the down note, we've had some problems with our voting machines here in Wilson with the touch tone screens. So We hope that that's cleared up. We have alerted the State Board of Elections. There's been articles in the newspaper.
Right.
We're doing word of mouth to be very, very careful and make sure that when you hit the button, you get the one you want. And if not, get someone to help you with it. So that's basically it.
Yeah. The word I've been using when I've been knocking on doors is every time I get someone who actually comes to the door, I say be very vigilant. Before you press confirm, before you press cast your vote, make sure you see exactly what you want to see. And I also have been warning people who do have touch screen machines, and I say that for the benefit of those around the state of North Carolina and the nation for that matter. If you do have touch screens, make sure you look at the usually they have a paper trail, a little roll of paper that's recording everything that happens under your absentee ballot, in-person, early voting, number, ID number. It's recording everything. So if you happen to you aim for one candidate, candidate B, and candidate A jumps up, you just keep hitting it until candidate B is chosen, and each time you choose, it cancels out the opposing candidate. So it sounds very confusing, but when you think of it simply, it's just make sure you're checking everything you're voting for. So I wanted to say something else, but I can't quite remember. But that's okay. There's a lot of information in our heads these days. Oh, yes, I do remember what I wanted to say before we bring on the Honorable Judge Mark Davis. I wanted to say that our spot there for the fair judges, obviously, folks, can't register to vote. That deadline has passed October 10th. However, you can register to vote for the next coming election, so certainly don't stop registering people to vote. However, you can't do same-day registration on Election Day and couldn't do it during early voting, unfortunately. But anyway, the rest of that still applies. Please get out to vote. Please get out and vote. That being said, let's talk with someone who needs your vote. We have on our show this evening, we're very honored and we're very excited to have the Honorable Judge Mark Davis. Judge Davis?
It's a delight to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we're very happy to have you on here. I'm glad you called us and we were able to pull this together and have this conversation. Before we get started into the types of issues that you can, and I say can with intent, and you'll explain that later. Before we get into the issues that you can talk about, I did want you to sort of introduce yourself to the listeners. What is your background in terms of personal, family, schooling, all that, and then also just talk about your experience in law and as a judge.
Well, I'm a lifelong North Carolinian. I was born in Jacksonville in Onslow County, and I grew up in Fayetteville. I attended E.E. Smith High School in Fayetteville and went to Chapel Hill for my undergraduate and law degrees. Coming out of law school, I was a law clerk for 2 years to Judge Frank Dupree, who was a federal district court judge in Raleigh. I then practiced law with the Womble Carlisle Sandridge and Rice law firm in Raleigh for 13 years. Then I went to the Attorney General's office and worked under Roy Cooper for 5 years as a Special Deputy Attorney General. I was named General Counsel to Governor Perdue in 2011, and I served in that capacity for 2 years, and I was appointed by Governor Perdue to the Court of Appeals in 2012, where I currently sit.
All right. And you mentioned something that I know Barbara's going to ask you about later, so I'll just let her ask you about that later. But I have a question for you that is related to, since we were talking about make sure you choose your candidates and make sure that the choice you have made is obviously recorded before you hit confirm. I wanted to ask you about the elimination of the straight party ticket voting. At first, I was a little concerned about that, and not to say I'm not still concerned, but here's my angle. I want to ask you, is it almost a benefit for those of you who are running in nonpartisan races that the straight party ticket is gone? Because a lot of times people would go in and just punch that, if it's a presidential year, they press for president and then they press for straight ticket, and they may not vote for judge in the nonpartisan races or for judges. So is that a potential benefit for you guys?
You make a really good point. I think different judges probably have different theories on that, but my theory is the same as yours. since 2002, judicial races in North Carolina have been nonpartisan on the ballot, and that means people who chose to utilize straight ticket voting would often have no incentive to look at the races at the end of the ballot because they thought mistakenly that by exercising the straight ticket option, they had covered everything, when in reality, as I said a minute ago, the judicial races have always been nonpartisan. And for that reason, there was a lot of drop-off that we found on both sides of the aisle between people who voted straight ticket and failing to vote for judicial candidates. So I completely agree with your theory. Because we no longer have straight ticket voting, whether one thinks that's a good idea or a bad idea, perhaps the good thing for judges is that it is going to force people to go through the ballot line by line, and hopefully more of them will reach the judicial races, which are typically at the bottom of or on the back of the ballot.
Yeah, and as I've been, as Barbara and I both have been educating ourselves on the importance of the races for political races. Well, I mean, put it in quotes, but the races for judges, for justices, they're almost, I would argue, the most important on the ballot. So why are they not at the top?
Well, it's a good question, and I appreciate you saying that. We certainly think the work judges do is very important. We have no control over where the races are placed on the ballot. I think that's entirely the responsibility of the Board of Elections.
Well, that's Barbara. You up for for another collection of information and an assessment and submit some sort of, well, I wouldn't say complaint, but maybe just a suggestion.
But let me just jump in. It is interesting to note that other than the Hagen-Tillis race, the Court of Appeals and Supreme Court races are the only races that are statewide. Everything else is local or regional.
Right, and that's... Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, I think people do forget that sometimes.
Right, and that's a good point that you make, because wouldn't it make sense to put the statewide races at the top together?
Well, I would suspect most judges would be in favor of that, but they don't ask us the ballot position.
Right. Well, that's why you got to have advocates outside of the bar or the bench or whatever, folks like us that can speak for you. But that being said, I do want to yield to Barbara because she has a number of questions that are appropriate, questions that hopefully you can, because you can't respond to certain questions because you can't talk about issues that may come before you on the Court of Appeals. But Barbara, I know, has done her research, so I'm going to yield to Barbara and let her get started with you. Thank you, Judge.
Alrighty. Yeah, it's great to have you on our show tonight, Judge Davis. I had a question. My first question was, what is a special deputy attorney general? We know what the attorney general is, but how did you get that job, and just what is it, and what did you do while you were the special deputy attorney general?
Well, that is a good question. Frankly, I'm not sure how they come up with their job titles, but that's the one that was given me. What I did was I was in a section, the special litigation section, that handled sort of the complex cases that were filed against the state. Typically, when people would file a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of a law passed by the General Assembly, then the special litigation section would defend the law in court and try to convince the judge that the law was constitutional. That and also sort of an eclectic group of other just complex cases in a variety of settings that were brought against the state. For example, I defended a law passed by the General Assembly brought by a waste management group challenging the legislature's decision to impose certain distance requirements between landfills and environmentally sensitive areas. I also defended a lawsuit challenging the way the Certificate of Need laws work in North Carolina. Really just an interesting hodgepodge of cases. I really enjoyed my time.
All right, that gave you a good background. My next question is, what does the Court of Appeals do? Because I think a lot of people have no idea just exactly where your cases come from, and once you have them, what happens with them.
Well, someone's first access to the justice system in North Carolina typically comes in the trial court, which in North Carolina is either Superior Court or District Court. As we know, Superior Court handles felonies and more complex, higher dollar civil litigation, whereas district courts handle small claims matters, misdemeanors, and family law cases. So whenever a party loses in either district court or superior court, they have an automatic right to appeal the decision to the Court of Appeals. Also, if somebody is seeking workers' compensation benefits in the North Carolina Industrial Commission, the losing party, either the party seeking benefits or the employer is seeking to avoid paying the benefits, whichever one is the losing party, they also have an automatic right to appeal the decision that are like to our court. And so our docket is automatic. We don't have any discretion about whether or not to take these cases. And most people who lose in trial court or in the Industrial Commission exercise their right to appeal. And that's why our caseload is so heavy. We decided about 1,600 cases last year, which is an awful lot for a court that only has 15 judges.
Oh, wow. Okay. All righty. I was listening to, I think it was NPR the other day, and they were talking about the difference between elected judges and appointed judges. And I just wondered what your take was, because it's an awful lot of work for you as well as the other judges that are running, because you are still working, and the court still goes on. And I just wondered if you thought it would be better to have appointed judges, or you think it's better to have them elected. Our Supreme Court is appointed, and a lot of states do appoint judges. But what's your take on that? How do you feel?
It's a great question, and in our circle we spend a lot of time talking about this. I personally don't think there's any perfect way to do it. I think there are problems with every model. The nice thing about elections is I think we all like the idea in a democracy of the people getting to elect representatives, officials, judges, the ones who have control over their lives. So from a pure democracy perspective, it's probably a good thing. But the problem is, on the ground, a lot of voters, through no fault of their own, are just very uninformed about who the judges are, who's doing a good job and who's not doing a good job. And so a lot of times they vote, based on factors that most of us would agree really have no bearing on whether a judge should be retained or not. Things like whether they have a so-called ballot-friendly name, maybe their gender, maybe their political party if the person does some research. And as far as, I just want to digress for a second on names. A lot of people devote a lot of time talking about whether a name is ballot-friendly or not. It really bothers me that we're sort of carving out a whole category of people in North Carolina who may be extremely gifted lawyers, who might make wonderful, wonderful judges, but if they have a name that's a little bit unusual, that's not a so-called traditional North Carolina name, they're almost certainly going to lose. And I think that's a real problem with the system of electing judges. But on the other hand, if you start talking about an appointive system, which some states do have, then you get into the question of who's going to do the appointing. Typically, it's the governor, and then it gets subjective. If you like who the governor is and you enjoy, or you maybe have the same political beliefs that the governor does, you might like the people the governor would appoint in any state. But conversely, if you don't if you're not a fan of the governor and you don't have a lot of policy views in common with them, you're probably going to dislike the appointments the governor makes. I guess the best system would be a merit appointive system where you take out the politics, but I think that's probably easier said than done. It's been hard, I think, for states to really use that type of system. So a long answer to your good question, which is simply, I don't know if there is a perfect way.
Okay, that was my conclusion after listening to that show the other day, too. And I find it...
Of course, of course you have the federal model, which we're all used to, with the U.S. Supreme Court and lower court federal judges, where the president nominates and the Senate has to confirm. And, overall, I think that system's worked fairly well, but when you get a situation where there's gridlock between the president and Congress, and we're certainly in that situation right now in many ways, you really run the potential that none of the president's nominees are going to be confirmed. So again, just no perfect answer to your question.
Yeah, well, I had never heard that ballot friendly. However, my mother, who passed away recently, she was 86. Her name was Avalon. And she said that the reason that she named us all plain names is because she hated having an odd name. So, evidently this has been going on for a long time, and she did name us all plain names: Patricia, Barbara, William, and David. So you can't get any plainer than that. So.
Oh, that's funny. For example,
yeah, it is funny because when you said that, I'm going, well, that's what my mother used to say.
Well, I think a lot of people believe that. I was at a judges' conference a year ago, and I met the Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, who was a wonderful, wonderful judge who's very well regarded, but her name is Shirley Abramson. And I really wonder whether she would have ever gotten her foot in the door in North Carolina just because of her name.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's all part of what we all need to do is educate others on the name is not important, it's the person,
Well, that's certainly how it should be, but I just worry that that's not always the case.
Yeah, it could very well be. As well as, now we've got the one race that has 19 people in it, which that is so unfortunate because if it could have happened earlier, I'm guessing it could have gone on the primary. And they said it'll take, 5% for one person to win.
Yeah, it's sort of a quirk in our election law. As you probably know, to start with, the law says if a vacancy occurs more than 60 days before the November election, that vacancy or that seat that the vacancy exists on will be on the ballot that November. So in other words, if the vacancy occurs before September 4th. In this case, our Chief Judge, John Martin on the Court of Appeals, resigned at the end of July. And since that was more than 60 days before the November election, that seat is on the ballot. The problem is it happened after the May primary, and there's no mechanism in our election law to have a special primary to weed the candidates down to two. So you had essentially a free-for-all filing period in which, as you said, Barbara, 19 people filed for the seat. And so it's a little unwieldy, I think, for voters to have 19 names on the ballot, many of whom, or maybe all of whom, they're not going to be familiar with.
Right. And it makes it, too, for the parties, too, to give a recommendation, even though we're not supposed to go by who's Democrat and who's Republican, we still do, and it makes it really hard because we've got some really good people running in that race.
There really are some good people running in that race, and I'm very hopeful that whoever gets elected will do a very good job on our court. But, from a democracy perspective, it is a little troubling that somebody could get as low as 6 or 7% of the vote and win a full 8-year term. I'm not sure. Well, I guess we all have our own opinions, but in my opinion, I'm not sure that's really a good government thing.
Right. Yeah. It like you said,
I don't
it's
think
a
you're
quirk
alone
in
on
it.
that one.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess we need to make some suggestions for some laws on that too. I'm not sure what exactly, but some changes.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see if the General Assembly decides to do anything about that particular law. But that's obviously a legislative issue, not a judicial issue.
Right, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Tell the listeners about the fair judges, who they are, why you all worked together. What was your goal?
Well, the judges you're referring to are Robin Hudson, who is running to keep her seat on the North Carolina Supreme Court. She's been there since 2006. Sherry Beasley, who's been on the Supreme Court since 2012, also running to keep her seat on the Supreme Court. Sam Ervin, who currently sits on the same court I do, the Court of Appeals, he's running for the Supreme Court. And then I'm running to keep my seat on the Court of Appeals. And Judge Lucy Inman, who is a special Superior Court judge, is running for an open seat on the Court of Appeals. And the five of us, I don't know if running together is the right term, but we've certainly been crisscrossing the state together over the last 2 years in support of our respective candidacies.
Okay, now, was that because of your political party or your friendships or just feeling like it would be better to show unity or,
Well, I think it's easier campaign-wise to sort of from an economy of scale perspective maybe to share certain things to make it easier for all of us instead of everybody trying to reinvent the wheel individually. But so I guess it's a group of judges who have the same core principles, who take their oath very seriously and their jobs very seriously, and worry about the threat of politicizing the court.
Okay. Well, I think it's a good idea, and I hold out that little piece of paper that has all five of you, and I tell people I've met all these people, and they're all good judges, and you need to vote for them. So and they say, "Oh, you have?" I think probably some people say, "Oh, she's been before them," or something.
Well, you're very kind to do that. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, no, it's the right thing to do. Tell us about what happens when a case comes before you. What you look at, what you think is your biggest asset when it comes to looking at the cases.
Well, and I probably neglected to say this in response to your earlier question, talking about the cases that come before us. I probably didn't talk about the kinds of cases we get. The answer is pretty much everything. Other than the death penalty cases, which go straight to the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals gets every type of criminal case imaginable. On the civil side, again, we get literally everything. Contract disputes, personal injury cases, administrative disputes, employment, environmental, insurance, education, election. And I could go on and on and on. We get workers' compensation appeals. We get every type of family law appeal, from termination of parental rights to alimony and custody disputes. Really, everything under the sun goes to the Court of Appeals. So what happens is when it gets to us, both sides file briefs, both the party challenging the lower court's decision and the party who likes the lower court's decision. And then we decide as a court whether the case raises new and complex enough issues to warrant what's called an oral argument, which is where the lawyers for the two sides physically come to our courthouse in Raleigh, and they each have an allotted amount of time to present their arguments to supplement the written briefs they've given us. We do that in about 17% of the cases. The rest of the cases, we decide on the briefs because the briefs are done well enough to help educate us as to the issues of the case, and we're able to resolve the case without the need for the parties and the lawyers coming before us at an oral argument. But once we've read the briefs and an oral argument case, listened to the argument, then typically we'll vote on the case that same day. Typically we have 12 cases on each 2-week calendar, so the three judges on a panel who are hearing those cases will go in a room, we'll talk about all 12 cases, cast tentative votes, and then the cases will be divided 3 ways. So each judge usually writes 4 of the cases. We call them written opinions. Each of the 3 judges on the panel will write 4 opinions in 4 of the 12 cases, and then circulate draft opinions to the other 2 judges, and then the other 2 judges decide whether to sign on to it or whether they disagree, in which case they would file a dissenting opinion. And in a case where there is a dissenting opinion, in other words, where there's a 2-to-1 split on our 3-judge panel on the case, then the losing party on the wrong side of that 2-1 split has the automatic right to take the case to the Supreme Court. In that instance, the Supreme Court has to hear the case. There's no discretion involved. But any other case, the Supreme Court could decide whether or not they want to hear a case or not.
Okay. Well, what percentage of the cases do you have a split decision? Any idea? I mean, I know that's, sometimes I ask for statistics and people say, "What? I never thought about that." But is there a percentage that you might know of?
Our court does keep statistics, and I probably should know that offhand, but I don't. But I can tell you that I believe in 2012, the Court of Appeals was the court of last resort in 98% of the cases that got appealed. So that, I think that statistic's indicative of the fact that a relatively, small amount of cases have dissent.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's good to know, because I was actually involved in something where the person actually did appeal his case, and I always wondered how that worked and, what he had to do. I'm guessing he had to hire a lawyer to take his case to the Court of Appeals, which was kind of ridiculous. But anyway, for the type of case that it was. But
and it is expensive. Unfortunately, legal fees have gotten higher and higher over the years. One trend that's a little disturbing to me is sometimes, particularly in family law cases, we see cases where the appealing party has an attorney, but the other side doesn't file a brief, presumably because they can't afford to pay a lawyer to handle the case on appeal. And, as a judge, you always want to hear the best arguments that each side can put forth. And when only one party files a brief, it makes us a little uncomfortable because we're not getting both sides of the story. And while, we obviously do our own research and, we don't just take as the gospel what the one side tells us in their brief, it's always preferable to us to have attorneys on both sides arguing the case. So that is something that's a little troubling when you're only getting one side of the story from the parties.
Yeah, I bet it would be. Okay. I think Bram Sarkowski has a question or two for you.
Yes, sir.
I just have one question, and again, I don't know how extensively you can answer it, but obviously in the primary, Robin Hudson was challenged by two justice candidates, and there was a lot of money poured into North Carolina to paint her a certain way, which we all know was not true. Trying to skew her a certain way for voters, and she came in first. So, in terms of them winning with their dark money or their big corporate money, they didn't win. But I wanted to ask you about the involvement of outside money from outside the state and dark money, if you can comment on it. I realize you may not be able to, but I just wanted to get your take on that, if you can.
Well, no, I think that's a fair question. Since the U.S. Supreme Court decided the Citizens United case a few years ago, things have really changed in elections, including judicial elections. Now, as both of you know, and I'm sure all our listeners know, we're seeing situations where outside groups are pouring, in some cases, millions of dollars into judicial races, and too often, in my opinion, are using negative ads to accomplish that purpose. North Carolina's been pretty lucky. Until 2 years ago, we were not seeing any negative ads in judicial races. And then in the urban newbie race, for the first time, we started seeing outside groups running negative ads trying to smear the reputation and character of one of the candidates. And then we saw that again, as you all have pointed out, 6 months ago against Justice Hudson in her primary. And regardless of what party you belong to, regardless of your beliefs, I don't know that anyone is really happy about the trend that this has taken. We've seen this happen in some other states where it's become the norm to have negative attack ads smearing the reputation of judges who are running for election or re-election. It's a very ugly and distasteful and disturbing thing. And it really bothers a lot of us who care about the independence of our judiciary in North Carolina to see this happening here. And all we can do is hope that it's going away and that it's not the portent of things to come. But I would really be very, very discouraged if that becomes the norm in North Carolina.
Well, let me do a quick follow-up, and then I'll throw back to Barbara D.
Sure.
if you guys are successful in your campaign against this dark money, as Justice Hudson was in the primary, and with your help and all the fair judges they're crisscrossing the state together, because you guys do a great job of pointing out the merits of each other. If y'all are successful in defeating this dark money, do you think that'll put it to bed?
It's a great question. As with many things in life, I wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't. I think it was very interesting to those of us who care about the issue that Justice Hudson did finish first in her primary. Everybody's got different theories, but one theory is that in a perverse way, the negative ad actually helped her because it was so outrageous and so over the top that people sort of got their back up and said, well, wait a second, we're not that dumb. We're not going to be misled by a negative, outrageous attack ad, and it may have caused people to rally around her in the primary. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that she won by a significant margin, and, perhaps that might send a message to these groups that these types of negative ads just don't work.
Right.
We'll just have to see.
Yeah. I have heard in the field several indications from voters who said that, I voted for Justice Hudson because that was just ridiculous. So at least a portion of the population did respond that way. But you're right. We'll have to see. So, but I will.
The jury's still out.
The jury's still out, exactly. I'll throw to Barbara D, and she'll ask you a few more questions before we need to wrap up this evening.
Sure.
Yeah, Judge Davis, I was looking at your web page, and it's great. And I was interested in where you have admissions. It says Supreme Court, Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Does that mean that you can go and try cases before all of these things that you've listed? And how do you go about getting the honor and the privilege to do that?
Well, in order to practice, when you're a lawyer, in order to practice law in any court system, you have to be admitted to practice at the bar. And so, for example, if you graduate law school and want to practice in North Carolina, you have to successfully pass the North Carolina bar exam, and you have to be sworn in to practice in North Carolina courts. And the same thing with federal courts. If you want to practice in the Eastern District of North Carolina or the Middle or Western Districts of North Carolina, you have to show that you're a member in good standing of your state bar and submit a certificate and have that approved. And it's the same thing in all the other courts that you're looking at, the U.S. Supreme Court, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. So there's no magic to it, but the predicate of everything is being a member in good standing of your state bar.
Oh, okay.
Probably a confusing answer. I hope that answers your question.
Well, no, I just wasn't sure, if you had to have a certain number of years or just what exactly you had to do, just basically in good standing, and then you apply because you want to represent someone in a Supreme Court case? Is that
correct? That's correct.
Okay. I never knew that, so I thought I would ask when I saw that you had done that. Honors and awards. You worked on the law review at UNC in Chapel Hill?
Correct. I did that my second year in law school. Great experience.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to say that. I bet that was a good experience. Do you remember any of the things that you wrote? I know that's been a while, but
Actually, Judge Inman was also on the law review at the same time I was. So she was a year.
Oh, was she? Oh, okay. That's awesome.
I wrote we call them notes, NOTES, which are just, I don't know why they're called that. They're really lengthy footnote-laden documents analyzing a particular case. I wrote about a U.S. Supreme Court case called Ward versus Rock Against Racing, which had to do with whether or not a local government could, within the First Amendment boundaries, control the sound of it was either a band or a political rally. It's been a number of years ago, but at the time it was something I was very interested in.
Oh, okay. All right. And as a second-year law student, you had the privilege of doing that. That's neat. What is the Order of the Longleaf Pine?
I was very humbled and felt very lucky to receive that. Governor Perdue awarded that to me. It's an honor. It's an award that's conferred upon somebody who's demonstrated a lifelong service to the people of North Carolina. I was very grateful to receive that.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I think I heard it because that is the theme of our state. I'm a transplant, so and I say our state because I've lived here a long time. But
sure.
Yeah. All righty. How is your family holding out with Dad being gone and husband being gone so much?
I'm blessed in so many ways, but the primary way I'm blessed is my wonderful family, my wife Marcia, and my three children who are 16, 12, and 7. You're right. A statewide campaign is a very grueling thing, and it certainly takes its toll on the amount of time you can spend with your family when you're a candidate, but they have been about as supportive as a family can be, and I'm profoundly grateful to them for it.
All right. Well, that's good because it does make a difference if you got that support.
Oh,
okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you can think of that you'd like to say about your running and why you want to continue? Or
well, it's impossible to love. I think it's truly impossible to love a job any more than I love this one, or to take a job any more seriously than I take this one. I'm so grateful to have broad bipartisan support in this race. I've been endorsed by 17 former justices and judges of North Carolina's appellate courts, including some Republicans and some Democrat. I've been endorsed by 16 former presidents of the State Bar and the State Bar Association. I've been endorsed by all the statewide lawyer groups, including the Advocates for Justice and the Association of Defense Attorneys and the Association of Women Attorneys. I've been endorsed by law enforcement and teacher groups and labor groups, and I've been endorsed by the News and Observer, the Charlotte Observer, the Greensboro News and Record, and the Winston-Salem Journal, among others. And I think it's just very humbling to be endorsed by that many groups and entities, and I do think it is a testament to the fact that I truly am fair and impartial and have no political agenda as I do my job. I take my oath very seriously.
All right. That is great because I was very impressed by all of your endorsements. I'm going, wow, so. All righty. Yeah, and I will say that it has been a pleasure meeting you at all the different places that we've run into you at, and I just feel like you're going to win. So anyway, I'm going to throw it back to Bram Sarkowski.
All right.
And see if he has anything else to say.
Well, I wanted to echo what Barbara had to say. It's been an honor, a pleasure to crisscross the state with you a little bit, or at least the eastern part of the state with you, or middle part as well. But we're very honored to have you on the show tonight. Thank you for coming on and giving us your time, because I know you are running around the state, and so whatever time you have is certainly valuable. So we're very honored by your presence. I do want you to plug how folks can help you, maybe volunteer, hand out literature for you at the polls and things like that. But first, if with your permission, I would like to play our fair judges spot one more time before the election. So I can go ahead and run that, and then when we come back, it's the floor is yours. So if
Thank
folks,
you very much.
Yes, absolutely. So folks, hang on the line. We got about a minute and 15 to listen to a spot, and then we'll be back with Judge Mark Davis.
Hello, folks. Bram Sarkowski of the Social Spitball Show. North Carolina Supreme Court Justice Robin Hudson won the May 6th primary. We've done our part to re-elect her to the North Carolina Supreme Court, right? Wrong. Part 1 of a two-part plan to knock out fair justices by the Koch brothers and other conservative groups has failed. However, a conservative will join Justice Hudson on the November 4th ballot. We need to stand up and fight for our fair justices who stand up for average North Carolinians on a daily basis. North Carolina Supreme Court Justices Robin Hudson and Sherry Beasley, along with Judge Sam Jimmy Irvin IV,
need your votes for them for North Carolina Supreme Court on November 4th. Judges Mark Davis and Lucy Inman also need your votes for North Carolina Court of Appeals on November 4th. Visit fairjudgesnc.com to learn more about each of these judges. Spread the word. Register new voters. Get out and vote, and get out the vote. Our daily lives depend on it. Thanks for listening.
All right, Judge Davis.
Well, thank you for running the spot. Y'all do a wonderful job of educating the people of the state, and we really, really appreciate it. As far as ways to help, judicial races, as we've talked about, are sort of low on the radar, and because so many people don't know about us, any type of word of mouth is crucial for us. It's huge. I have a colleague on the court who won her race 8 years ago by 3,000 votes, and in a state of 10 million plus people, that tells you how narrow the margins can be. So spreading the word about our campaigns on Facebook, on Twitter, by email, by phone, by all this wonderful technology we have, that really makes a difference. And then if anyone's willing to work a poll, work a precinct for us on Election Day, that's huge, and really helping educate people about our races who might not otherwise know who we are or why our races are so important. But anything people are willing to do for us is just incredibly appreciated by us.
And they can, if someone listening does want to do that for you in the next day or so, if they hear this, because this will be archived and we can share this, as you said, on social media. If anyone wants to help you, can they go to Fair Judges NC and connect with all of you, or how can they connect with you to volunteer?
I think that may be the best way, to go through fairjudges.com.
Okay. All right. So fairjudgesnc.com, go there, and you've got all the Fab Five, as I've heard it referred to, listed there, and all of their websites, and for a guy my age, I
think I said that, Judge Davis.
yeah. I think Barbara may have coined that one. But it makes me think as a Duke fan back in the early '90s when Duke had to play the Fab Five in the final game, the championship game. But this time the Fab Five is going to win. So absolutely. I think we're going to pull this one out for you guys. And anyone listening to this, as Judge Davis said, please spread the word. We can't register voters, as we said in the spot, but we can get out the word, and we can educate folks on voting for judges in nonpartisan races. And so please, fairjudgesnc.com. This is the Honorable Judge Mark Davis, who's been on the show this evening. Please share this as a podcast. You can share it on Twitter, social media, Facebook, all that. But this will be archived, so please share the word. And Judge Davis, thank you again for coming on the show. Barbara and I are very happy and honored that you did this for us.
Thank you both, but the honor is truly mine. I'm just so delighted that y'all were willing to have me on and take the time to ask all these great questions and talk about these important issues. I really, really appreciate y'all doing that. Yes,
sir. Thank you. And
you're welcome.
And folks, let's get out the vote for these justices and these judges. So get out there and go vote.
All righty. Good luck on Tuesday.
Thank you all. Take care.
All right. Have a good night.
Okay, you too.
Bye.
Night.